I would like to welcome everyone for coming to this fantastic event today. My name is Penny Morris, and I'm the president of the Mitchell County Historic Preservation Association. We collaborated with the Wapsi-Great Western Line Trail Committee and the Mitchell County Conservation Board to host today's celebration. The mission of the Preservation Association is to educate the public on the historic structures and sites and their link to the history of the people of Mitchell County. We host education programs, workshops, and we work with individuals and organizations to preserve these sites and stories. So, when the County Conservation Board moved the updated cabin, which you see behind us, to this site, they didn't know what to do with the then derelict old log cabin that was sitting here. They asked for input from the community and found many people passionate about the cabin. So today we celebrate the cabin's restoration, and we will hear from the people who made it happen. What the Preservation Association thought we could do is maybe help preserve the story of the cabin so future generations wouldn't think that this cabin didn't have meaning. So we got a grant from Shop on State. We got help from graphic artist Adam Mark to design the sign. And future generations will know what this cabin means to the community and how it ended up here. We will hear from a series of speakers. If you did not get a program, raise your hand. Our first speaker will be Dio Koenigs. He was one of the Boy Scouts who helped build the cabin, and you might notice you'll see signatures in the cement along the side. Dio can tell us about that. Our second speaker will be Deanna Eastman. She's part of one of many families over the years who have used this log cabin. Bob Lowhouse completed well, it's not completed yet. He's been in charge of the renovation of what you've seen so far. He'll tell us what still needs to be done. Adam Shirley will let us know about the plans of the Conservation Board. And finally, Elaine Govern from the Wapsi Trail will tell us about their plans for this area. I want to point out on the back, there's a little coupon that if you would like to help further the renovation of the log cabin, you can donate. If you forgot your checkbook today, take the coupon with you. Be sure to write in the notes section, it's for the log cabin, so the county conservation puts it in the right fund. We do have a couple of cans up here you can donate in. It'd be great if we filled them both. So I will let Dio start the program today.
Well, thank you, Penny. And I don't have a title. I'm a retired farmer, so it's not hard to understand that. I would like to, first of all, start out by thanking those folks who objected to it potentially being removed, this cabin, and put money where their mouth is and provided some money. And so as a result of that, it's still here. And looking at it, it looks to me like it's more sturdy than the day we left it when it was brand new. It was non-professionals that built it, and obviously it looked that way. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but anyway, thank you. I won't mention any names, but you know who you are, and thank you a lot for doing that. I would like to call your attention to the picture of the Father Schmitz and 5 men from Meyer that were really instrumental in getting this accomplished. And that picture has a story by itself. It was in our archives, if you will. Joan inherited the picture from her parents. And on the back of the picture it says, sent by the Mason City Globe Gazette. Now the picture was taken at the Meyer church basement. And someone from the Globe Gazette obviously came out, and I'm assuming did a story about the Boy Scouts. I'm not sure about that. We went into the archives and we couldn't find anything about it. So you press people that are here, maybe you can do a better job of finding. We've got some stats in the back of the picture. It gives potential places where it might be stored or whatever, but we have the original picture. So anyway, that's a thing. I think there'd be a story in that if you can find more than that. But if you look at those men, next to Father Schmitz is Paul Kazel, and I think 3 of his sons are in the picture below. They were also Boy Scouts. And next to that is Henry Koenigs. He would not be closely related to me. He's of another family in Meyer. And it would be like Ray Koenigs' father, and Sue Wigman would be the daughter. Next to that is Joe Neese. He became my father-in-law, but he's Joan's father. And next to that is Al Koenigs. He was my uncle and my godfather. And then the last one is Leo Michaels. And Leo was a scoutmaster, and he did more, I'm sure, for the Boy Scouts than anyone else. Well, Father Schmitz did a lot, but Leo, I don't ever remember going to a meeting that Leo wasn't there helping. And his son, who was on the picture, was really the only Eagle Scout that we ever had in Meyer. Now, I know we got a few that were belonging to different troops that became Eagle Scouts, but if you ever thought about being an Eagle Scout, you'll find out it's not easy. I don't know, 20 or 24 merit badges. It takes a lot of work. But Bob was that kind of a guy, and he helped us out a lot too. But I wanted to mention Leo in particular about that. I should have some notes here. There's been a lot of changes in 70 years. It's been about 70 years since we've been here. For one thing, if you tried to get here 70 years ago, Joan was pointing out, if you got here 70 years ago, you couldn't get here from McIntyre. You had to come from Bailey. If you look, there's a little trail out and back, and you probably had to drive through 2 different people's properties to get here. And so that was the only way to get here. Father Schmitz had an old 49 Chrysler. It was new at that time, but he would actually drive it out here, and he wrecked it. He didn't care if he had scratches on the paint or whatever, but he drove out here. But some of us walked, and some of us rode tractors and some old pickups, but that's how we got here at that time. And so that made a big difference in what it was like 70 years ago. Another issue is that this was private land, and it looked different then. Farmers at that time had livestock out here, and they ate grass, and it was more like a river pasture. You could look up and down the river and look quite a ways, and you could sit along the bank, and it was a comfortable place. Now there's no livestock, and of course, it's pretty much what it is today. It's kind of growing up, but it's a little bit more wild. I have something else. Okay. That's the road, private land, and pasture. Okay, well, when we built, I was told to say what happened when we built this place, and frankly, I couldn't remember very much, and it occurred to me that I should have taken notes 70 years ago when we did it, then I would know. But from my perspective, I remember that when we got here, there's a cleared area, I suppose it's in this area, and Bus Eastman, who lived just to the east of us, a quarter of a mile or so, they got a horse from him, a single horse, and we dragged those logs out of the woods and came up here. And my job was to skin the logs and get them ready. And some of the men and the other guys were notching the logs and getting them ready to put in place. So I remember that, and that's one of the few things I remember. So I'm not sure that I could tell you a lot more about that part of it. I think we spent like 2 or 3 days doing this. And then the troop took a break and went home, and maybe we didn't come back for a month or so. We did all of this in the summertime when the farmers could help. They wouldn't do it in the spring or the fall, and that's the reason it took 3 years to build. My father-in-law, at that time, he was just a man I knew, Joe Neese. Joe knew him. He was a county supervisor, and at that time, the supervisor had those old, we call them drag lines. They were cable-operated stuff, and they were shovels, and they would do work with it, and they would have to every now and then change the cables on them, and so the county had those cables on hand, and so he brought cables along and cable clamps, and so it was his job then to help build that swinging bridge. Now, Joe wasn't an engineer, but I think that he probably, some of the things he did for the counties spilled off on him. But when I was helping, I remember the cables were attached on the far side of the river, and the two main posts were buried on this side, and they had a log. He called it a dead man, and that's why I remember the term, but I never heard that before. But it was a trench that crossways to the river, and he was measuring the depth of the hole and putting the cable clamps on the cables to drop them in the hole. And when it hit the bottom, the cables were at the right tension. So we didn't have computers at that time, and he was measuring and figured it all out. And it seemed to work out. And then the log was sitting on a pedestal, 2 pedestals, and we just lifted them off and dropped them in the hole, and then, of course, filled it up. So I remember that. And then I should tell you the well itself, the spring, when that was done, they had about a 30-inch culvert, and I think it's still the same one that's there. And they knocked out a little area where the water would spill over, and we set it upright, and we attached a long pole to it with chains, and a couple of young guys sat on top of the culvert to give us some weight, and we twisted it around with the long poles to get it to go down into that soil where the spring was bubbling up. And we got it down far enough that the water would rise up over the top of that culvert, then spill out where those spillways. So, and I think the county came in and did some more work on that later on when they finally took over. So that's about what I remember about that portion. I really have to mention what I think was probably the most important thing about what happened, and that was that this was private property. The Sloan family owned the property here, and they were elderly people. And so, of course, when they passed away, what seems to me like it was only a few years after the cabin was built, it was for sale. And Jim Rundy, who farms just south of here and just on the other side of the river, purchased it. It was now, when Jim purchased the land, he got the cabin with it. So, of course, that's the way it goes. And I don't know that Jim ever told anyone they couldn't use it, except that for a period of a year or more, he had befriended a man who I'm told was from Austin, and he had cancer, and Jim poured a concrete floor in this cabin and put a ceiling in it and double walled it and made it more comfortable so he could stay in the wintertime, and they brought in electricity from Jim's farm. So at that point, why, nobody stayed here when this guy lived here. But a few years later, Jim was getting elderly also, and he decided to sell it, and he sold it to Mitchell County, and I think that's what really made it stay for sure. I'm comfortable today that Mitchell County will never sell it. You all own a part in it, and you wouldn't let it go. I think they would have big trouble if they decided they were going to sell this place, so it won't happen. Um, So I think that that probably is a thing that I would like to stress the most, is that this 50 years from now, we could be out gathering, we, not us, but, well, me not at least, but some of you could be gathering again. They decided to repair this cabin. And we can guarantee it'll still be here. And I think that for a bunch of, it's kind of a historic reminder of some young boys with good leadership from their parents, what they can accomplish. I think this was a tremendous thing for them, and I hope that as you get older and continue on down the road, that you will consider this something very important for all of you. So I think I'm proud to be a small part of it, and I emphasize small. I didn't have much to do with it. I think you saw some of the pictures of the Boy Scouts here. The only thing I should mention that in 70 years, as I've looked at the pictures, a lot of these guys are not here anymore. They're gone. They've passed away. And while I was mentioning it, Buzzy Shaver, who was in the top line, he died last Friday, and his funeral's in Johnsburg next Wednesday. So anyway, well, thank you, and I hope this stays here for a long time.
Thank you, Dio. I did forget to mention that in addition to Shop on State helping to fund the sign, that FEMC, the Foundation for the Enhancement of Mitchell County, provided a grant to the Mitchell County Conservation to help defray some of the cost of restoration. Thrivent helped with some of the treats for today, and if you look at the back, I hope I've got most of the people who also, in addition, contributed money. There may be some typos, and I might have missed some, but I did my best. And Deanna, would you come tell us about what this has meant to the community over the years?
Hi. I guess when they said that there was needing input on what to do with the old cabin, they were talking maybe tear it down, maybe move it, and to leave this area and take it somewhere that people could see it. And I guess I thought, there's been many, many, many families that come out here that, use this cabin, that over the years have been here. From my youngest time, I remember going to my Grandma King's, and the biggest adventure was that we got to walk across the cow fields, going through the pastures and going through the woods to get to this cabin. We'd make it an adventure. It was, you'd walk out there, you'd have to look out for the cow pies, you'd have to look out for the barbed wire fence, and finally you'd get to this cabin. And, it was a big deal to get to the cabin and be able to say we got here, go over to the spring, go across the swinging bridge, and get a drink from the spring, and then come back to the cabin and mess around here looking at all the different trees, and the deer had rubbed the trees or finding skulls or whatnot when you were out here. Later on in life, we'd take hayrack rides out here, making sure that Grandpa King was able to get out here. He was in a wheelchair, but we always made sure he got out here once a year. And I know there's numerous families around this area have those same stories of coming out here for a day. Some, they'd snowmobile from Stacyville, come out here, put a little fire in the stove, talk about what they saw on their trail that day, put the fire out and go on their way. I mean, it's someplace to be, someplace to go, and my memories of, it was never, it was either called the Jim Rundy's cabin or Bailey cabin, when they named it Finnegan Alders. It's like, I still name it Jim Rundy's cabin, and I probably always will, because, it was on his land. I later learned that my husband's grandpa was the one that hauled the logs out here by horse. So it has meaning on both sides of my kids' family. Today we have one of the 5 generations is here. So, we've been coming out here for 5 generations, which means a lot to this community, or, to have this out here. You don't always have to be in the big city to have fun. You can come out to the woods and, look at nature, and you can make fun no matter where you are. I think every kid in McIntyre, Statesville, Meyer probably has been out here at one time, good or bad times, memories, when they were supposed to be out here and when they weren't supposed to be out here, but they probably had stopped here, so. That's, I guess, my memories of growing up by the cabin.
I should also mention that on our board for the Preservation Association, who's here today, was Shannon Paulus, Mary Blake, and Roger Loden is somewhere.
Over here.
Oh, there's Roger. And if you look in your program, I hope you've all got one, you'll notice there's the pictures of the swinging bridge, which looks like it's a little treacherous. Don't tell Adam, but people can still get across. I got across and I got over to the spring, which is kind of overgrown, and those are one of many things that we continue to need to get repaired. But Bob Lowhouse will tell us about how far we've gotten so far and how much further we need to get to. So Bob.
Well, I suppose we'll have to start approximately a year ago. We had a meeting out here one evening, and we discussed what we should do, and we found out we could get possibly a grant, but we had to come up with some money. And so there was 5 individuals donated money, seed money, and we qualified for a grant. And we kicked around ideas about bake sales and this and that, which we had a time limit to get our grant, which it didn't work and wouldn't have worked probably. And at the time I mentioned to Adam maybe we should offer a free night stay in the cabin over there for anyone that contributed $100. And he thought that that was a workable idea. Well, then as it turned out, we got our grant, and then the other day when we were discussing other plans, I brought it up again, and Adam agreed that we could probably handle that. So I guess if anyone cares to donate, it's on their end, care to use the cabin, or either one, it's available. Of course, this one got to sleep on the floor because that's one of our items that we need some funding for. I'd like to put a little larger windows in. These windows here are not the original windows. They had old barn sash in it originally, and then these were put in 35 years ago. But I'd like to put in a little larger, about 6 inches wider, and get a little more natural light into the cabin and make it a little more friendly. And of course, we have to put the wood stove back in and make it operational again. And then some bunks would be nice. And originally, the stories that you read, there was supposed to be some fold-down bunks that the scouts use, but I've talked to pretty near every scout that's available that's alive yet, and none of them can remember how they were, where they were even in the cabin. So I guess we're going to have to go with something else. But and then I rechinked this end of the cabin, and Leo Jordan come over and helped me remove the old chinking, and I started on it. I'd never chinked a cabin before, so it was kind of trial and error. This end took 4 days to do, inside and outside, and Leo come one day and he says to me, he says, "You want me to start tearing out the rest of it?" And I says, "Not unless you want to put it in." So, but that would be another plan that, I went around and patched up all of the really bad spots in it on the chinking, but it really should be done. It isn't necessary, but I'm not going to live forever, I guess. And, so that's another thing that we'd like to do on it. And of course, as they talked, Swinging Bridge needs remodeling, and every year when the water comes up, the debris comes up against it and damages it, and there's some changes should be made there as well as the spring. So I guess anything or everything would be greatly appreciated. I don't know if I'm stepping on Adam's territory there or not. But anyway, that's my feeling. But we jacked the cabin up. Of course, we had to brace it quite heavily because it was fragile. And we jacked it up, and our intention originally was to move it off of the site and then pour a new slab of cement and move it back on. But after we got it up, we figured we better leave well enough alone. It was still in one piece. So we pulled the old cement out. The slab that sits over here, the picnic tables are on, was part of the old floor. And it stayed in one piece, and so we thought we better reuse it. And after we got the cabin jacked up, we noticed on the foundation the names of the scouts that were there the day that they poured the concrete. And it was done on August 20th, 1949. You can read that in a lot of spots. And I'm sure that that's not all of the scouts that worked on it. It's just the ones that happened to be there the day they poured the cement in there. And so we thought we should probably save those, and the rest of the floor, of course, went into a ravine. And, but we did save that, and we saved the slab over here. So, and I'd like to try to get a list of all of the names that are on there. Some of them are wore away pretty bad, but I think if a guy studied it long enough, he'd be able to figure out who they were and whatever. But definitely was done on August 20th, 1949. So, I guess that's about all I have to say on it. And the lumber inside, I had a Mennonite down by Charles City saw that for me to try to make it look authentic time period, you know. And of course, originally, every other rafter on there was a piece of a tree, and every other rafter was an old 2x4, and the boards were used lumber when they were put on, and they stayed pretty good over the years in consideration, but they were pretty rotten. So we have pictures up here of some of the progress as it went down through the months. So.
As pointed out, I forgot to mention two of our board members who are here today, Carl and Molly Jensen, also are on the board for the Preservation Association. Thank you, Carl and Molly. And I would like to ask Elaine Govern to come up and say a few words about the Wapsi Trail and their plans for incorporating the cabin.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. When I come to a woods like this, it reminds me of a book that I read by John Madsen called Where the Sky Began. And it's not a history book of politics, of kings and battles, but it is about people and the land that they live on. And when he made the statement in the very beginning, he caught my attention because he said, at Plymouth Rock, if a squirrel got up in a tree, our country was so wooded that that squirrel could cross the nation all the way to the Mississippi without ever coming down to touch the earth, I suppose to eat, but think of how wooded this country was. And think of the farmers that cut the trees and pulled the stumps and cultivated the land. And you know the sacrifices that they made to make this country productive. And I just get inspired by that. I get inspired by the history of our country. When they talk about a 6-mile grove up by Lisle, when they talk about a 40-mile band that they put in for protection of the Indians in this territory. And if I look deeply in the woods, I almost see that Indian with his bow and arrow peeking around that tree. And that gives shivers to my spine to think about that. And it makes me applaud the people like Adam Shirley and the Conservation Board who work to try to keep this for our country. What would our children say if we completely wiped out something like this? And so I applaud those people a lot. There are 3 occasions in my life that I came in touch with this cabin, indirectly or directly. And the first time was Laverna Cruzy, who was a member of the Meyer Church, and she had been asked to write the history of the church at Meyer for the Archdiocese of Dubuque. And she didn't type. She was a beautiful artist, but she asked me if I would type that history so it could go to Dubuque. And that's when I found out about the priest and the Boy Scouts that worked on it. And the second time was when my husband, who was in the real estate business, was called in by the Rundy family to sell this farm. And he managed to do that, separating the farmland from the woods and approaching Milt Owen. Then the Mitchell County Conservation acquired this piece for all of the generations that come after us. The Rundy family itself could have perhaps capitalized by cutting trees and plowing up ground, but they didn't. They kept this beautiful piece. Bailey itself has a lot of history, and I know that Lucille Jensen has provided the trail committee. Leo Jordan has provided the trail committee, the Rundy family, with some of that history about the Sloan family, about a church that was at Bailey and it was taken down and moved to another town, a garage that was there, a school that was there. So things have changed, but the woods remains and the stream with the trout remains. So those were the 2 occasions that I ran into this cabin in the woods. And the third time was a little bit more personal. And when my son, who's now 50 years old and an attorney in Milwaukee, when he was in high school, he and his friend, Ken Kleckner, were Boy Scouts. And winter survival was an important part of getting a badge. And so, Mom, we're going out to the woods. It's in the wintertime, very cold. And so Irene Kleckner, Kent's mother, and I, with trepidation, said, okay, you can go. And when they were up here, a huge snowstorm hit. This is before cell phones. Can you imagine, all you mothers, how you would feel when there's 6-foot drifts on the road and your boy is out there in the middle of a woods, and you don't know if they know enough to crack a window so that they don't run out of oxygen when they're on the stove, and what are they going to eat? You know, all of those things. But it turned out okay. But those are my memories here. I applaud all the people who have worked on this. Besides Dio, are there any other of those Boy Scouts here? And your name, sir?
Rum.
Did you
Jim's
want to say?
brother.
Did you want to say a few words?
Well, I would, if let me go without the speaker. You know, Father Schmitz was an unusual person. He came to Meyer driving that 41 Plymouth that he had rolled over. He had tipped it over. And it was wrinkles on the top and on the fenders. And the parish didn't think very good of the religious leader to be driving that thing around. They took up a collection of $2,000. At that time would buy anything, any kind of car, almost. And he gave him the money, but he didn't buy a car. He bought hockey equipment for the Boy Scouts. So he's still driving that thing. And a year later, they took up another collection, but this time they bought him a car. And it was a 50 Chrysler, not a 49. Okay. Okay. But anyway, that's the kind of guy he was. And I'm probably the last person here that I talked to him. He was born and raised in Gilbertville, Iowa. I lived in my wife and I lived in Waterloo for 25 years. And he wound up at a nursing home in Gilbertville, and I went to see him, probably the middle 80s. I knew he was there. He recognized me, and he said, "Do you still get back to McIntyre?" I said, "Occasionally." He said, "Is that cabin still there?" I said, "Yes, it is." I said, "You've done a good job." So that's it. So he was quite a man, walking saint, I call him.
Thank you for your contribution. Give him a hand. The trail came through this woods, and it came through the woods because there was no more railroad to go on, and it was owned by Mitchell County. And it's the same reason that the trail goes through Lake Hendricks, because there was no other way to go. And so with the forbearance of those people and those private landowners, the Wapsi is within a mile of the state line. We have a station now at Bailey. Today, it's the BBB Adventure, Bike to Bailey and Back Adventure, to put McIntyre and Bailey and this area kind of on the map and let other people know about it. The Rundy family really needs to be blessed for what they have contributed. The kiosk that will be at Bailey will have some of the history of that area. And they sponsored that kiosk. We're still working on the history to go into that. And so the other plan that we would like to do with the trail is wherever the trail goes in Mitchell and Howard County, we need the names, the family names of those farmers where that trail crosses, because we would just like to have kind of a history of family names, whether it's Rundy, Sloan, over a period of time. There was a bench at Bailey that was a memorial to Polly, Lily's mother, and it disappeared about a year and a half ago. So you who are in the area, you need to be the eyes and ears and watch what we together own in this area. So feel free to go up and have a picnic lunch. There is a crew there under Polly Lily's command. There's ice cream sundaes or floats down at the trailhead, and you're all welcome to that. There are some cookies up here. I made some old-fashioned kind molasses cookie and a Dolly date cookie, so you're welcome to that. Thank you for your support of conservation and the Wapsi-Great Western Line Trail.
Thank you, Elaine. We had one more board member slip in, and that was Mary Hankey. We have one more speaker, and that's Adam Shirley. But after Adam speaks, I'm going to ask if there's any other Boy Scouts so we can get a picture, if it's only two of you, of the Scouts, and then if we can get a picture if there's any family members. I know there's some family members here whose parents were involved in this, and we'll get a picture of all of you in front of the cabin after all of our speakers have had a chance to speak.
All right, thank you, Penny. And thanks to everyone else for coming. Quite a show we got here today. I did not expect to see all of you out here. That's great to see the support. Kind of reminds me of when they first put that ad in the paper about the cabin. You know, we were looking at this thing. It was in poor shape. Bad roof, bad foundation, bad chinking, bad electricity, everything was looking bad, and the board had an offer from someone, hey, we'll take this off your hands. So someone was smart enough that before we went ahead and did that, we put a little ad in the paper, and sometimes we don't get any response, or very little response to an ad that goes out there. It's just a little clip in the Mitchell County Press News, and if you happen to miss that week's edition or whatever, nothing happens. Well, this time we decided to put, maybe we'll tear it down in there and see if we could get some eyebrows raised, and we sure did. About 30, 40 people showed up to our board meeting the next week and told us just what was left here. And what was left, yeah, it didn't look like much, but just from hearing the people talk today, you can all understand that this is a lot of history is what's here. And that's what we're here to preserve. And I think the first place to thank would be all the donors who matched the grant funds to come up with the money to get the project started. Many of you listed there, thank you for your support. And then again, a big hand to Bob. He came up with the plans, did all the work himself. Just to let you know, he went about $4,000 or $5,000 over the grant's budget out of his own pocket without asking any permission or funds. It was just going to be taken care of. So if you do have a few dollars to throw in the can today, that'd be much appreciated. That's all right out of his pocket and his good heart and the work he put in here today. So I'll talk a little bit about just the area as Elaine alluded to. It's not just a special cabin and a special place, but you've got a very unique 250, 300 acre area that we've got here. And it's a beautiful woods. There's a lot of work that needs to be done out here. As you can see, we've got the bridge that's not looking too hot this spring. A couple issues with that people might be curious to know is that when they did that in 1949 or whenever it was, there weren't a lot of permits or anything like that you had to go through to work in the river. So that they could just go down and get her done, so to speak. Nowadays, we got about a 6-month wait on permits just to be able to do that. And they haven't got that cleared yet, but we're confident that we can work through that. And with a little help, we'll have some funds and get it looking a little better and more user-friendly. Safe for the insurance companies. So right now you can technically not walk over that unless you're very adventurous and don't say anything. But we'd appreciate if you stay off the bridge until we do get it repaired. That being said, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the woods here. So like you said, it used to be pastured, so this was a much more open area. And you can see some of the old oak trees here. There's beautiful oak timber down there, and we're blessed to have this area. There's wetlands, there's prairies. This is a good representation of what Iowa used to look like, minus some buffalo and elk and things like that used to help keep it a little more open. So you will see over the coming years some progress in that as well, trying to restore those habitats and make it look a little nicer out here for you guys. Also better for wildlife. With that, I do want to make a little pitch. Our state is kind of lacking in funding for natural resources, and there's a big issue coming up this year in the legislature. It's called the Iowa's Water and Land Legacy, also known as a State Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. Some of the big points of this are that it provides money for water quality. So anything dealing with like CRP plantings and things like that, there'll be more of those programs available. Right now, Mitchell County put in over 1,000 new acres of CRP last year. Some of that pollinator habitat, I see some landowners out here that we helped plant for. Doing great stuff. It compares with rental rates. It gets pollinators the habitat they need, and it cleans up our water. So some funding for that. Another big thing that this issue would address that's not issued that's directly pertinent to this area is trail funding. Currently, you can go out and get grants to build beautiful bike trails. But once you get them built, there's no money to maintain those trails. So you're talking, $200,000 a mile to replace asphalt in some cases. And we've got trail that's 10, 15 years old in spots that we're going to need some funding on here in the near future. So this Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund will provide some dollars for trail maintenance finally. So I just want you guys to consider that. I've got a poster here that if you support those types of things, we'd like to get your signature and maybe a picture from you. that we can send down to the legislatures. And if you have more questions about where the money's coming from, how that works, I'll be around after, so don't be shy. Come talk to me about it, because it's something we really need. Our state is 48th in the nation as far as outdoor resource dollars. That's pretty low. And considering, the rest of our land use is agriculture, we need to put a little bit more back in to make sure that soil stays healthy for us. So I don't have anything else to say, and Penny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Adam. And I really want to thank everybody who came out today, everybody who contributed. I hope I got your name listed in the program. You know who you are. And I'd like to invite you to come up, get some refreshments, get something to eat. There's more than the 2 Boy Scouts. I want to get their picture together in front of the cabin. And then I'd like to get any of the family members of any of the Boy Scouts, and I see some of you here today, to get your picture in front of the cabin, just, that thing about preserving history. And once again, thank you all for coming today. This has been a great, great program.
Hi.
One more thing you want to say here?
Yeah. My name is Keith Eastman, and I don't really care who gets all the thunder, but it appears it's all going to the Meyer Boy Scouts. There was a scout troop from McIntyre that I was a member of, and we had a leader by the name of Dale DeRee, and he was very instrumental in seeing to it that the cabin got completed and done. My dad was Bus Eastman, the guy that skidded the logs up here with an old mare of ours. But this is not the first cabin in this area. Or if you go right down the river to that first bend, there was a cabin there that a family lived in when I was a kid. And they were parents of the Sloan family. And the cabin has washed away now, or else burnt down, but the bend in the river has widened because of the currents. If you ever walked through the woods as a kid, you would see a lot of open areas. And that was because the Irish were shanty and they were squatters on that property, and there'd be some rocks that would be lined up, and that's where they lived. There was a lot of shanty Irish between here and state line that lived in this area. And I remember pretty well of all the times that we came out here and camped and helped do this. And I don't think that there's any other scout members that live around here. But if you want to know about the insides of the cabin and what it was like and where the bunks were, all you got to do is go across the road and ask Danny Hawkins, because he and Kenny Rich spent a winter out here. And maybe the bunks weren't there at that time. But they spent a winter out here and would walk to town on snowshoes to get maybe some tobacco or some flour or some whatever, but they were about 15, 16-year-old boys, and they spent the winter out.
Well, see, now you've just opened up a whole nother part of our history that we need to get recorded.
Well, I can't report it any further than that. That's the way it is.
Anything else we left? I'm sure there's other things we
I
left out.
think Jim always was with him too. If anybody remembers Jim.
Any other stories? Any other stories we should get recorded here today? Well, we should get your picture when we take a picture of the Boy Scouts, because you were part of it too, the McIntyre Boy Scouts, and that's a story we haven't told yet. So thank you again for coming. Give yourselves all a big hand.